All right, you Herle Burly-ites, pretty cool show we've got for you today. We're doing a bit of pod crossover, and here's the reason. Naheed Nenshi became leader of Alberta's NDP just under 2 weeks ago. Not just by a large margin, or an extra large margin. Landslide may not even be a strong enough word. Mr. Nenshi's win was first ballot, 86% of the vote, more than 10 times that of the runner-up. I really want to know how that happened, having been involved in a few of these myself. And there's few better to do that with than his campaign co-director, a man who also happens to be a co-creator and one-third of the Strategists podcast, Zain Velji. Hence, it's a Canadian political pod crossover today, Herle Burly-ites. Zain is the man behind Nenshi's powerful political brand. He's vice president and partner with Northweather, a strategy and marketing firm focused on charities, nonprofits, causes, and advocacy. He helped lead Nenshi's successful mayoral campaigns, and he played a big part in the Alberta NDP campaigns in 2019 and 2023. He's going to have a lot to say moving forward about the look and messaging of that party. Zain is a regular political commentator with the CBC. His works also appeared in the Toronto Star and Globe and Mail, and in 2019 was a panelist on CTV's national federal election coverage. So, lots of bona fides there, Alberta and beyond. We're going to talk about it all today. Nenshi, Alberta politics, federal and provincial, and the federal scene more generally. Zain, thanks for doing this. It's great to have you on the Herle Burly.
Herle, what's going on, brother? I'm looking forward to this. And I did not bring Stephen and Corey from the pod. So we don't have to deal with the recklessness that they provide to the conversation. It's just the guys behind the hosting, you and I.
No, exactly. The people, the adults in the room.
That's right. No, thank you for having me on. I'm a huge fan of your work, of your pod, of everything you've done to kind of help move the political conversation in this country. I mean that genuinely. So thank you for having me on.
My God, that's awesome of you to say. Thanks. How are you enjoying your pod?
So much fun. So, we started back in 2015 and we did this as a total whim. Like it was one of those things where the 2015 election was the Notley versus Prentice debate in Alberta. We were three Alberta guys, for those that don't know our show, the Strategists. Yeah. And there was no one covering debate coverage. And it was, if you remember, that was the math is difficult debate. It was like the line that kind of came out of it. And we're like, we should start something. So we just threw up a mic, recorded something for the first 10 episodes, didn't even bother putting it on the podcast app. And I've kind of carried on that sort of, undercutting ourselves culture on the podcast. We took a break for a while when Corey went to go lead comms for the provincial government under Kenny and Notley in the Public Affairs Bureau. And then we kind of come back since, July 2020. And it's been a blast, man. It's been so much fun. Just the act of hanging out with people that you really like. I think that comes through just like it does on your podcast. Like it seems like you guys genuinely like each other. Even when you had Jenny on, right? Like you guys would have
Jenny.
Right, vast political differences. In our case, less vast, but political differences nonetheless. But still mutual respect and it's just a hang, and I love that.
Yeah, well, congrats. I mean, your pod's very successful. I shouldn't say this, but I do occasionally check the charts, and I when I do that, looking for mine, I see yours. So congratulations.
Hey, it's good company to be in. Likewise. So yeah, no, it's exciting.
So listen, there's lots I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
But let's start with a victory lap on the leadership win. It was astonishing and really showed how strong Nenshi is to come in as an outsider and win like that. So where did all those memberships come from?
Well, in the spirit of the victory lap, I also want to, give one to obviously the candidate. Naheed was incredible. My campaign co-directors, Devry and Chima Nakendram, Devry Corbin, who were Naheed's chiefs of staff when he was mayor. My colleague, Richard Einerson, like one of the best media buying digital minds in this country, organizing minds in this country. Where do they come from? I think a couple of streams, right? Listen, I would be lying if I said we didn't have an advantage in some ways when it was announced and when we announced it that Naheed was running, because there was a built-in base. Now, did we know how big that built-in base would be? And if it had atrophied, if it had weakened, if it had moved on, if the enthusiasm level was there enough to not just be like, hey, I like that guy, but I'm actually going to put my money down, right? You know how difficult that part is between the delta of someone being like, I like that he's running. Thanks for his service. to being like, yeah, I actively want to get involved. I want to put my $10 down in a system that, requires multiple pages of a transaction. When we think of this as marketers, we have to think of all these hurdles, right? Like these are actual hurdles. Abandoned shopping carts, when we talk about that in the consumer space, like we have to think about it that way in the membership purchase space, especially in this new digital online world. I think we got a few different sort of coalitions stitching together, right? We had, in terms of the net new folks, we had folks that really believed in Naheed and have been part of his movement, his candidacy, and what he's done for years. You had people who came off the sidelines that we felt like were lukewarm supporters from him from a mayoral perspective, but said, no, absolutely, this is a stark contrast, and the question is very simple, and he's drawn it very clearly. This is about viability and defeating Danielle Smith. Those folks joined in. And then, as the results showed, and this is largely due to the work that Naheed has done with the rhetoric, the message, there was a lot of existing members who, were a part of the fold that converted, but a lot of existing supporters of the NDP who may not have purchased a membership, may not have been part of that initial 8,000, but said, yep, this is it. We like Naheed. We're going all in something like this. So, that I think in the broadest, roughest skeleton sense was the coalitions that got stitched together. Now, was there folks that, are former conservatives that joined the NDP to support Naheed? Absolutely. They fundraised for us. They joined the party. They certainly did that. Do we need to make growth there? Absolutely. But I was pleased by the rural support that we got. Hundreds of memberships in rural constituencies being sold through the campaign, in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, and maybe not rural, midtown, mid-sized sort of cities, right? As you know, Alberta familiarly, Fort McMurray and Grand Prairie. So like there was growth outside of Edmonton, Calgary. But I think one thing is clear, the power base of this party, as the numbers indicate, have kind of shifted to Calgary, his candidacy being part of that, but also where a lot of these memberships, net new memberships, have come from. So we're quite excited about what lies ahead.
Let's nerd out for just a second. Mechanistically, how did you sell them?
Oh, you want to talk tactics? I love this conversation. So, there was when we got into this, we were pretty inexperienced, because I have not run a leadership campaign as a campaign co-director or heading up some of the digital organizing here. And we sought a lot of advice, and most of the advice told us that all of this work is done entirely on the ground. This is a network to network based. You find the folks at the top of the node, you're relationally organized, and then those folks kind of convince others, and you sell memberships on the ground. And we did that. I think we did okay at that in certain cases. But I'd have to say the vast majority of the memberships are maybe kind of defied conventional wisdom from a leadership perspective, which is they were over the air, right? They were folks volunteering themselves to say, I want to commit to Naheed Nenshi, and I want to buy a membership for him. Getting deeper into the mechanics, what we did is on our website, nenshi.ca, we kind of built a portal where in order to buy a membership, not really, but in order to buy a membership to support us, we'd love for you to sign up and buy that membership on nenshi.ca. You fill out your information, right? You fill out fields that we wanted from you that the party sometimes wasn't even collecting, including your phone number, et cetera, as a mandatory field, because we wanted that ability to contact you. We then created a funnel. From there, you would get transferred into the NDP page, but it would still look like you're at nenshi.ca. Right at the top, we'd give you instructions being like, great, you've made it to step 2. Now you need to purchase your membership from the Alberta NDP. We load an iframe, which is just a way of saying we load the page from the NDP onto our website, so people don't have a multi-page experience. They're on one sort of loop, and then they fill that out, and as soon as they complete their transaction, they get punted back to our page where there's a thank you page that says, great, you've bought your membership. Now do one of the following 5 things to help us. Text or email 5 friends, either, hey, you have a couple of bucks to donate, that would really help us, share this particular image online and add your own sort of reason why. So mechanistically, the answer is very simple in the sense that it was an online portal. We had to sell memberships through the party's website. We created a front door at nenshi.ca that kind of drove a lot of people to us. The advantage there is just from a straight sort of marketing perspective is it allowed us to kind of see who was converting, because we would get flashes of updates from the party every week. So we could kind of see like, okay, Herle's signed up on nenshi.ca. I don't see him on the rolls. I need to go back to him and convert him. And then we would create a specific marketing campaign that would include text, email, phone to make sure that Herle knows that he needs to buy his membership, that he may have thought he did when he filled out his form, but the full conversion process has not happened. And so we'd have a helpline set up on a text chat. We'd have all these sort of things set up. So sorry to get so detailed, but I suspect that's what you kind of wanted to know in terms of like what it looked like and
how it looks. It means that people who were members had already demonstrated a significant level of commitment.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like you went to a church and just signed up 1,000 people who didn't really know and didn't really have any deep interest in the project. I mean, these people had to actually go through some hoops and expend some effort. So, because one of my questions was going to be the remarkable turnout.
Yes.
The voting turnout that you got, because normally there's a heavy discount rate on the memberships you've sold in a leadership or a nomination compared to what you actually get voting. And you didn't seem to have that discount.
Yeah, traditionally we were told, you multiply this by 0.5 or 0.3 because that's kind of what you're going to get, right? Someone sold this membership on behalf of your campaign. Their connectivity back to your campaign has at least a few degrees of separation. That inherently is going to mean that there's going to be softer turnout. And in this case, I sit here as someone who helped the campaign, but I want to give credit to the folks that signed up. Like, they did this, right? Like, in some ways, yes, did we have a GOTV machine? Yes. Am I proud of it? Absolutely. Are there tactics I think we're going to use going forward? 100%. But what we found here was a lot of people who volunteered, put their hand up, said, I want to show up. I like what I've heard. I like what I've seen. I credit the air war. I credit the ground game. I credit the candidate, right? So we got the message out. But then they kind of took the step of purchasing their membership. We were out there on the airwaves in terms of trying to use advertising and other things to remind people that this is happening around deadlines and his candidacy, et cetera. Created unique targeting audiences for that. But people put their hand up, they signed up, and they showed up, like, quite literally, right? Like, there was a voluntary commitment to say, I want to be here and I actually want to be part of something when I vote. And, one of the challenges we wanted to ensure that we prevented against was people getting lazy, people feeling like they, this thing was in the bag, because, those narratives circle around when folks kind of see some of the numbers come out, and especially when they know that they're not maybe their membership sales. But it feels like at the end of the day, people showed up in a real way, and it feels like they're voting for something that I think the exciting part is that they want to continue to be a part of. It's not like the transaction has stopped. In fact, I think the relationship has just started in some way around what these folks are doing, because frankly, not to, charge too far ahead, we're going to need that. We're going to actually need like the political athleticism of members turning into like advocates in order to kind of make this a go in a couple of years' time.
So if you add, Zain, 80,000 people to an organization that had 15,000 people,
sure,
you have dramatically changed that organization. How has this campaign changed the Alberta NDP?
That's a great question. I think in some ways it has changed it, in some ways it's expanded. And you might say I'm kind of talking about semantics, but in one way, I think it's clarified and crystallized the central focus of the Alberta NDP. We want to form government again. Under Rachel Notley, the question was always about, especially with the 2015 success, everything that they did after the vote in 2015 was to ensure that they formed government again, right? 2019, that was the aim. 2023, that was the aim. We came close in 2023, but it was never in question, right? It was never in question around what the Alberta NDP were. And so when you take it from 15,000 to 80,000 plus around a candidate like Naheed, who promoted viability, defeating the UCP, defeating Danielle Smith, or, I think it crystallized the question that this is a party that wants to not just be a cause, a party that's on the side promoting things that might have 70% support, 90% support, but sell it in a way that only appeals to 30% of people, which I know, and I can get into my rant about progressives the past, and not a criticism of the Alberta NDP historically, but just progressives, right? We often don't package things well. We take things that have large popularity. We don't necessarily sell them well to a vast majority of people, but we don't want to be that cause. We want to be true to who we are. We've got value systems that we agree with. We have a spokesperson in Naheed and someone who we want to go out there, not just be without guardrails, but have a sense of flexibility around how we want to sell these things, what we want to sell to people, and convince them that this is the party for them. But I think more so than anything around what it's changed. I've talked about the power base moving to Calgary. I've talked about thousands of volunteers being added in. I've talked about the, Naheed Nenshi, a historically nonpartisan candidate, someone who I met on the campaign trail, in 2009, when we're neighbors, and he got me involved in politics. That's how I actually got into this whole thing in 2009. And his nonpartisan approach, you're adding that sort of coalition on top of it. But I think what's central to it is we have values These values are not flexible. We have the right person to sell these values. We want him to do the work. And more so importantly, we have crystallized and put to bed the question that this is not a cause, but this is a movement and a party that wants to form government. And again, I think that's quite exciting because to some people, I think that question was open. That question was, it was a jump ball post Notley, being like, what do we want to be? Right. Yep. And it's really nice to receive the mandate that says we want to win. We want to, we have certain guardrails. We're not going to do anything and everything to win. And winning is not just the outcome. Winning is the outcome to make life better for people. But we want to freaking win.
Right. Sound like the Liberal Party.
Oh, that is a criticism I'll have to rebuff, David. But yes. I sit here in Alberta. I'm allergic. I'm getting hives already. Yeah, but in some ways, right? Removing that Liberal sort of banner from it, what we're trying to build is something that it seems like the UCP has given up on as a project, which is trying to court folks where they're at, meeting them, being curious, non-judgmental, asking them questions. One of the things Naheed famously said on the campaign trail is, and when asked about rural voters, which I 100% agree with, has been a long-standing sort of part of my philosophy, is that one of the things we just have not done well historically is listen. And before we listen, just judge, being like, how do you vote conservative? I don't understand that, right? How do you vote for something that undercuts and undermines your day-to-day life or your pocketbook, et cetera? And I often think we misunderstand what voters want, what rural voters want. I'm not going to sit here, despite my denim jacket and cowboy gear in Calgary, I'm not going to, pretend to know what folks want in certain communities, but are we going to do the work? And is he and that fabulous team within the caucus going to do the work to figure out non-judgmentally what people want, how those views and that curiosity reconcile with what's needed? Absolutely. And I think that's what's exciting.
A broad question for you, Herle Burly-ites. How are you all with new technology? Do you dive right in fearlessly? An early adopter, as the ethnographers call it? I have a confession. I'm not that anymore. I'm what's more accurately described as a Herle adopter, which means typically I like new tech and I eventually get around to it when it makes sense for me or when I just stop my goddamn procrastinating. In any case, new technology is the subject of this next series from our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Let's call it the Summer of Fascinating and Very Useful Tech. I know, clunky, even as an acronym, TSOFAVUT. In that overlong acronym, we're going to show how TELUS is more than just an early adopter, how they're an early innovator, developer, and partner on a number of pretty cool technologies. Not just for the sake of being those things, mind you. Nope. The goal here is better network resilience and improved outcomes for Canadians, labor productivity, and the economy writ large. Stuff like artificial intelligence applied to easing the horrendous traffic conditions in Toronto. Feel me on that one if you live in Toronto. Network slicing to ensure connectivity and resilience at massive commercial events like auto racing and music festivals. A new TELUS 5G lab in Quebec that helps young businesses experiment, innovate, and rapidly develop technological proofs of concept. Groundbreaking AI language modeling that's custom tailored to specific enterprise, quantum computing, open radio access networks, and more. We'll be doing this for the next number of weeks, Herle Burly-ites. The Summer of Fascinating and Very Useful Tech, TSOFAVUT. Man, I wish I was better at acronyms. Some people, Zain, have compared this to when Tom Mulcair took over the Federal NDP and then was deposed by the Federal NDP, in that Mulcair was an outsider, not a historic New Democrat, brought in, as Jordan Leichnitz would say, to do a job, hired to do a job, didn't do that job, and so got fired from that job. This seems a little different because Nenshi brought his own party to the party. But how do you see similarities or differences there between Nenshi being chosen with the provincial NDP in Alberta and the Mulcair choice federally?
I think to your point, we brought in memberships here. This party is fundamentally different. It's been expanded. The size of the mandate, when you look at that, the voter turnout, the directionality around, people agreeing that this needs to be a path forward to figure out how we defeat Danielle Smith in the UCP. This was hotly contested, sure, but it was not the sort of hotly contested sort of ballot that we saw with Mulcair and Top in some ways, where there was deep divisions and fractures. I feel like, not to speak too early because there's a lot of work to be done over the summer and a lot of work within caucus. But I feel like we're on a path to ensure that, people are at least aligned on the cause of what we're trying to do. Right. And to, I think, abandon Naheed, so to speak, if that would kind of be the sentiment after something doesn't work out well or the poll numbers don't work, I think would be potentially abandoning the question that I think a lot of folks in this election, in this leadership election, I should say, have given a green light for, which is we want to be viable and we want a pathway to victory, right? We want to show what that looks like. And I think people have the patience to know that, in terms of, and this is credit to Rachel Notley, getting back to Notley levels, sort of like dead heat, and then building upon that, that's going to take time. That's going to be work. That's going to take time. That is going to take optionality that the party has not had beyond Edmonton and Calgary. I know there's a lot of people who say that in rural Alberta there can be no appeal for Naheed Nenshi. I disagree with that. I'm not saying that there's going to be mass appeal across the entire rural spectrum. There's going to be a purple/orange wave that happens. No, but I think that in certain communities there's going to be optionality in ridings, especially those mid-sized cities, where folks maybe don't even consider themselves to be what we bucket them as, which is rural. At the end of the day. So, I think the comparison is fun. It's a fun pundit exercise. I like you, like to go on those shows and talk about that. But I think it is fundamentally different. The mandate size, the question that I think folks have greenlit around viability, around wanting to form government, around winning. I think that's exactly what we see here, especially with that size and scale of the mandate that now is just the first step in many.
So he's a provincial New Democrat. Obviously, he's the leader of the party. If he's a federal New Democrat, I've never heard him say that. What differentiates the Alberta NDP from the Federal NDP?
I think we're going to see the members say that and give a voice to that. As Naheed has talked about this question of whether it be severing ties, loosening ties, creating an off-ramp or options for the members as it relates to the federal NDP support. It's a sensitive issue, but it's one that he wants to surface. So it's not one that he's been shying away from. It's one that he's actually leaned into every time he's asked, saying, right, I can't let this bubble up. I mean, what separates the party? I think sitting in Alberta, I'm going to give you the most obvious answer, which is where is the federal NDP on energy? Even some of their questions in Parliament most recently, and some of their advocacy, even with Angus kind of leaving around the energy sector, around pushing for certain things in the energy sector, limiting the sector's ability
criminalizing the sector, basically.
I was going to say limiting their ability to innovate, right? Demeaning the sector in certain ways, not seeing as what most Albertans here see it as what the Alberta NDP has historically seen it as under the leadership of Rachel Notley, which is a deliverer of prosperity to many, many people, multifold, generationally, but also not being shy, as the Alberta NDP and Naheed have not been, to ensure the word transition is not given the connotation it currently has, and that Alberta gets to lead on transition, but also gets to produce the last barrel of oil. Because we should and we can. And you're a prairie guy. I'm a prairie guy. I get this. I don't work directly in the energy sector, but have me and my family felt the fruits and labors of it? Absolutely. And even if I don't want to admit it in our own pocketbooks, the taxation, the roads, the infrastructure, everything outside is,
Alberta is the best publicly funded province in Canada by a mile.
There you go. Right? And I am privileged to live here, and this is not just like a sappy immigration story, but like I'm privileged to live here because of the work the sector has done in paying its share, its royalties. Do we need to think about certain things around what the future looks like? Absolutely, but this sector is here to stay, and I think that's where it starts with the NDP, and then it becomes, and this is just me talking, conversations around identity politics and such in terms of where the Alberta NDP is on that, right? And this is a hairy subject, a subject that's difficult, but I think to chat about, which is, do we want to be a party for working people, or do we want to be a party that projects certain sentiments, certain virtues that we're not able to necessarily live up to, right? That we're not necessarily to action on. And I think one of the things that the successes of Prairie New Democrats historically has been is that they've just gotten down to work. right? They've found things that a lot of people want. They've sold them in practical ways. They haven't overcomplicated them. They haven't talked about them with all of the commas and the asterisks that often comes with progressive communications, right? They've just said, hey, do you want this? We can deliver it for you. Wab Kinu's a great example. Horgan in BC was a great example. Did I disagree with Horgan on pipelines? Absolutely I did. But did I like what Horgan was about? Just a straight talking guy? Yeah, absolutely. Did I love what Notley was about? No bullshit. Just show up. Here's what you get with us, right? And Naheed, despite his pedigree, kind of has that same sort of like, hey, I'm going to level with you, right? And it's that sort of like broader sense of language, that broader sense of culture that I think Alberta brings, where people don't want to be told what to do. They want to be told what they're getting, and they want you to kind of deliver it, get out of your way. And if you deliver, I don't care if you're a brown dude from Calgary who happens to be Muslim and Harvard educated, just fucking do my shit, man. Right. And like, I think that's the kind of vibe in some ways that we want to try to ensure that we tap into. And I'm not sure if that is culturally aligned with the federal NDP right now.
Well, I see some potential problems down the road there, Zain, because I would assume that the AOC progressives in Alberta would see Naheed as a torch carrier for them. And if he doesn't, we'll be disappointed. No?
I think what what folks should see Naheed Nenshi as, if you're sitting at the federal level, is someone who is here to persuade, here to actually take what you believe and package it in a way that persuades people. And that might sound too poetic. That might sound too like, what is Zain talking about? But honestly, one of the things that I feel like we've given up on in terms of the broader progressive movement is persuading people. We've just kind of given up on this aspect of saying, I know it sounds insane, right? Like, oh my God. But like saying, how do we take things that the majority of people want, package them in the way that majority of people will respond to, and then deliver, right? And I think we've been, if you could look at that as a 3-step process, find what they want, package it in a way that's sellable, and then deliver it. We've kind of failed on 2 out of those 3 items, right? We've kind of packaged it in a way that often limits. It closes the doors on who can support this, because we only want it to be a thing that certain people support at a certain period of time, and we got here first, and we've always been true believers, versus blowing the doors open, saying you can be part of this. You can support policies that advocate for certain sort of things, universal programs, looking after the most vulnerable, climate. How do we sell it in a way that ensures that it meets people where they're at? They don't feel like they're being preached to or sold in a way that is overcomplicated, or someone that's talking down to them. I think that's where language becomes absolutely huge. That's where I think Wab Kinu has been an absolute master. Even when you look at how he did his Canada Day.
That
right?
was beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, 40 seconds of carrying a flag, saying, I saw this in Paris, here's what it means, and here's why I celebrate my country, for all the groups that had to fight for this. I mean, that undercut a 12-minute essay on the nuances of, right? Like, which is what the progressive solution would have been. Like, okay, we got to acknowledge this group and that and that. And yes, there are sensitivities, but he did it in such a classy way, in a way that made everyone feel seen, feel heard, feel respected, right? And he did it with charm. And he did it with, and he did it plain spoken. I think that language aspect of packaging things in a way that we can ensure people understand, that we're clear-eyed about, I think is important, and then executing. And I think that's the part that Naheed's most excited about. Now, will we get to execute in the next 3 years? No, but I think we can certainly make big headways on the first 2 pieces I've just laid out there.
Yeah, dropping patriotism from the brand is one of the biggest mistakes the federal Liberals made. I don't know why they did it. But
yeah, we kind of let the flag. In that period, we kind of let the flag go away, being like, yeah, you know what? We can have this co-opted. And then honestly, what happened? It got co-opted, right? The convoy co-opted the Canada flag. Many people nervous to kind of take it back. Patriotism at the core of it, both in terms of an emotion, but also an intellectual sort of like grip given away. And here we are trying to struggle to figure out how we kind of recapture it. Do we recapture it? What does that look like? And Wab Kinu comes out with 40 seconds that just lets people know, like, okay, I can breathe easy now. Right. And I think that's one of the things, which is, that video that he put out, and similar to the video where the UCP are now running attack ads on Naheed, and he comes back with a very quick clapback around like, oh, they're so predictable. I think in many ways is to just assure supporters of your party that, like, it's okay. Like, we're going to get through this. We actually, don't worry. Like, giving you license to say something, feel something, do something. I think that's leadership. And I think both of them kind of display that level of leadership.
All right, so clapback tweets are one thing.
Yeah.
But if they're going to bury you in money, in advertising, do you have the cash to fight back?
So to be absolutely transparent about this, I helped run the 2023 advertising for the Alberta NDP. I helped run the 2019 advertising. I've not gone in with Naheed now. We've got the smart and super David, I've got few skills. So we've got the smart and capable folks, Devry, Chima, others kind of helping with transition. I have not seen the books right now in terms of where the Alberta NDP are, to be absolutely honest with you.
I'm just watching what Poilievre has done to Trudeau, what Ford is doing to Bonnie Crombie in Ontario.
You're absolutely right.
This is the playbook, and they're going to run it.
And one of the things, the lessons that the last two provincial elections have taught the Alberta NDP, regardless of who's at the top, and I believe you'd share this opinion, is that, and in fact, we're seeing it in the US right now as well, is that really most tactical elements of a campaign are being eroded, and that the main one emerging is paid. Paid media is it in some ways, right? Yes, it matters in the final 10 days that and I'm a sports guy, so can you hand the ball to your star, to your leader and say, go win this for us, right? Like we've done the negative, we've done the defining, we've taken your message, bottled it up, and we've done the more proactive propositional, but we need you to win this in the last 10 days. Here's the ball, go, right? That still matters. But outside of that, paid is going to be a huge, simple, defining, effective.
Well, media doesn't exist anymore, right? So the only way to get your message out is paid.
Absolutely, and we see that with what they're trying to do. So the question I would have for the UCP is, it'd be looking at where they're trying to go, where the audiences are that they're trying to hit. Are they trying to save territory or build on it? Are they trying to define Naheed before he gets an opportunity to define himself in some of those mid-sized cities in parts that the UCP hold that they feel like they shouldn't? I'd be so curious to see where that spend is in Edmonton. Do they feel like they're able to make any gains or headway in there? But at the end of the day, I think this party will have the cash, and they absolutely have the understanding and appetite that paid is where the game is, right? I think the last two elections have made it absolutely clear that an announcement today doesn't really work. A press release a day doesn't really work. That you're honestly, like the other side, the leader can go in hiding. Danielle Smith went in hiding for 10 days during the election, quite literally, but their paid kept running. And so, I think there is an element to that. The question then becomes when, right? We're 3.5 years out. If they want to spend the money now, I think there's also strategic questions on when we spend the money, what that looks like. Is it propositional? How does it define? How much do you save until the end of the election? These are strategic conversations that I think are needing to happen. But I think this is a very long-winded answer for you to say this party absolutely understands the value of paid, because it is now a lesson that has been burnt in twice based on where we've been. And not to kind of say other parts of the campaign don't matter. That's not true at all. I think everything needs to come together. But in terms of the air war, paid is where you have to go, and an effective, crisp messaging is what we have to develop, and we will.
Advice from the cheap seats: spend the money now and count on finding the writ money later. Yeah. Don't sit this out waiting for the writ. I watched it happen federally, and now the writ doesn't matter.
It seems like a formality in some ways, right?
Yeah. So you talked about this in terms of winning the next election. Is the basic idea that he sweeps Calgary? I mean, the Alberta NDP did very well in Calgary, but there's lots of UCP seats there.
Yes.
So is the plan to sweep Calgary and add that to Edmonton, or is the plan? I mean, I'm just writing off pure rural, because pure rural prairies are so conservative right now. It's really, I don't even know how progressives begin a conversation with them, but the smaller cities are probably different. Is that where the game plan is?
I mean, I can't talk about the game plan right now for two reasons. Number one, I think it's the fact that we haven't constituted what the game plan is, but also I think more importantly, we're 3.5 years out.
Well, the theory, when you were thinking about how he would win an election, how did you imagine that it would happen?
I think that the basic theory here is correct, right? We have Edmonton. Not to say we can take that for granted. We have to continue to build in Edmonton, solidify Edmonton, make sure folks understand that they've got strong local representatives there and an overarching message that works. Okay, that's Edmonton. Calgary, I mean, you hold just above 50% of the vote in Calgary. Amazing accomplishment. I think a strong, solid accomplishment, but you don't hold some of the seats you need to. So I think there's a secondary plan here, which is two things that need to happen in Calgary. Number one, the marginal seats you won last time, you got to win them again. Mm-hmm. And number two, the marginal seats you lost last time, you got to win them. right? And I think Naheed's candidacy in particular, being a guy from East Calgary, there's a couple of seats in East Calgary you need to target, cross Calgary East. You need to look at Bow. I think you look at those and you're saying, okay, I can make inroads there. You lay on the mayoral map of 17 where he won, and you're like, okay, there is possibility here, right? Are we getting overconfident, being like there's guarantees here? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think that would be political malpractice to just kind of lay over the map and be like, just let Nenshi, we'll just kind of let the brand do its own thing. No, I think there's work there. There's candidate building there. There's constituency stuff. You know this stuff, right? So we got to do that. And then I'd say it comes down to the mid-sized cities. We need optionality. Any party, any race you'd run, if you have 47
you need a few different paths to victory.
Absolutely. You got 47 seats to win 44. It just doesn't work. And so we're going to have to do the work of persuading, doing all that stuff I was talking about, right? Let me regress for a second, because this kind of brings up something I kind of hold as a personal sort of credo. There's a businessman here in Calgary, Jim Gray, who is like an oracle of Calgary, like a downtown oracle. It started as one of the first oil and gas companies and exploration companies, was an emeritus chair of the YMCA board. I just finished my
I met him
term as
years
chair.
ago when he was crusading against the video lottery games in bars.
Come on, I wasn't aware of that. Okay, yeah. Jim's been a community guy for years. And do we see eye to eye on everything? No, absolutely not. But I have the world of respect for him. And when you go to his office, right, it's this beautiful office in a downtown tower, and you sit down with him, and he's 90 some right now, and he's still dispensing wisdom. He's got one sign on his little desk. It's like right there, and it says, "Build bridges before you need them." And he's like, if you follow this as a personal credo, life will just seem seamless for you, right? If you build bridges before you need them, even if you never use them, that's the point of life, my friend. And you dispensed this advice to me when I was like 17, and I've gotten to know Jim since. And I think that's a political tactic as well, an incredible political strategy that I think we often fail at, which is we come in for the transaction. We come in year 3 with 6 months left on the clock and say, sorry, things got busy. You probably understand why we had to we had to make sure we secured the fortress in Calgary and Edmonton. But hey, nice to meet you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Nope. No, it can't be that way. And if it is that way, the bridges need to be built now. We don't need to ask for a single vote. We just need to build trust, confidence, a relationship, and do that at scale. And it's difficult. It's arduous. It's tough. But I think that's exactly what Naheed has signed up for, and I'm hoping that's exactly what these 80,000 plus people have signed up for, as it relates to not just showing up with their $10 and voting, but like being political athletes and engaging in their own communities and building out support networks and doing that hard work.
You got to find a way to get those communities to think of themselves as urban centers rather than extensions of the rural around them. Yeah,
and I think it starts even if their ridings have an appendage of rural, et cetera. I think it's just being fair with people, being like, as Naheed would say, a nurse in Medicine Hat probably doesn't think of herself as a rural person, right? And probably lives a very quote unquote urban life or a mid-sized city life, and ensuring that you meet folks where they're at, how they see themselves, even if they don't see themselves in their geography, that's important as well, right?
Right. So I saw a quote in which he described the Smith government as dangerous and immoral.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty strong language. You rarely hear language that strong. What's dangerous and immoral about the Smith government?
Well, I think you're going to need to have Naheed Nenshi on to give you the whole treatise, Herle. At the end of the day, I think it's...
Delighted, for the record.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a constellation of things around both policies and how they pursue them. Right. And I see that right now. The dangerous aspect is certainly how they're dealing with things that are life and death scenarios. Right. We're looking at the electricity grid, which is what he was referencing in that particular quote when we had that massive cold snap. And this was a government that had no idea how to navigate the electricity grid, when to send out an emergency alert, how to kind of, convince, persuade, communicate to people around what actions needed to be done and required. Something that Naheed, as mayor, as you can imagine, and dealing with that 2013 crisis, has a very storied record on, and is very interested in and frankly expert at in some ways. And in moral, we look at things that that they've done recently. We're going to see coming up in our next legislative session in the fall. They're going to bring their actual legislation forward for their anti-trans legislation in terms of what that looks like, in terms of what they would advocate as keeping kids safe. But what and many experts and many others have debunked is the most regressive anti-trans legislation that we have seen in across Canada. It's a government that, in his mind and in my mind,
you don't see that as a trap?
I see that as a conversation that might start out as a political trap, but one that needs a response. I mean, at the end of the day, this is one of those things where if it's about kids, I would engage in the conversation. If it's about undermining people's human rights, I would engage in the conversation. I would fight for those folks. And I think that's exactly what Naheed wants to do. I think at some point, like his political operation is very simple, right? If it's right, we'll do it. If it's wrong, we'll fight against it, right? And I think right now the political trap might be sent, and they might be excited looking at that bear trap, but it's also something that will undermine the actual rights of kids in this province. There is no questioning that, and is trying to peddle in an omnibus way, drive through a lot of things. Is it an argument that they want to have? Absolutely. You're seeing the appetite from Mo and Higgs and others, and even at the federal level, Pierre hasn't necessarily quote unquote shied away from it either. But it's
because if you say to parents, in my experience, and I'm too old to actually have a substantive view about this. I don't know what's right. But if you talk to parents and you say to them, your kid could change their pronouns at school and not tell you, and you wouldn't know. Nobody would tell you. Mm-hmm. I don't actually find many parents who agree with that.
Well, and I think one of the things that the right collectively, when we look at this from the United States kind of creeping up to Canada, they've won the frame here, and at least preliminarily won the frame. Because I think there, as a parental rights conversation, rather than a path that is a dangerous path that jeopardizes freedoms of kids, right? That jeopardizes freedoms of folks, and frankly adds a lot of sort of fluff to the argument by encouraging certain things that already folks cannot do, certain types of surgeries, et cetera. But at the end of the day, this will harm trans kids, right? And this will harm children. And it's a fight that we'll have to win on the frame, and it's a fight we'll have to win on the policy. And it's going to be something that I think will need a collective approach. But when you go back to the root of your question, dangerous and immoral, right? And he's also added incompetent there. As the three defining sort of words, right? You're going to see that, and he's going to provide proof points. And you look at electricity, you look at what they're trying to do with being power hungry with certain elements of Bills 18, 20, 21, where it talks about, what municipalities might be restricted in, what researchers might be restricted in terms of doing. There's a case to be made, but the case needs to be made cogently. It needs to be made simply. It needs to be made on terms that I think folks can buy into. And it cannot be made from the NDP perspective in a way that we swing at every single pitch every single day. It needs to be in a way that is easily bottled up. One of the reasons, those 2 or 3 words is because they've been repeated, right? They've been repeated over and over as part of message discipline, right? Yep. They were repeated in the launch video. They're repeated on day one. They were repeated from the stump, and they're going to continue to be repeated. And we're going to provide those proof points as they emerge, unfortunately, as these policies keep emerging that prove those points. But it's not going to be a day-to-day, let's just swing at every pitch without a storyline. We've got a storyline. We want to, attack them in a certain way. We want to, and we're going to continue to do so. And I think you're already seeing that.
Yeah. We have entered glorious July, people. Hot, lazy, fun July. It's the best month. And at the end of this week, one of the best July events begins. Friday is the first day of the Calgary Stampede, or just Stampede as it's called by those who know. Our sponsor, CN, is a longtime friend and supporter of Stampede, as you'd expect. But I want to talk for a minute or so about CN's role in Alberta writ large. The simple fact is that no other company is more important to Alberta's economy and way of life. CN connects Alberta to the world. From Fort McMurray south to Calgary, the province is a vast hive of production and manufacturing, and the railway enables it all. Just about everyone understands by now that the Alberta heartland is Canada's largest producer of hydrocarbons. Natural gas, butane, crude oil, refined diesel and gasolines, and renewable energy products. Alberta fuels huge swaths of North America, and CN literally hauls Alberta energy. Then there's forestry. You might not know it, but more than 60% of Alberta is forested. Lumber, wood pellets, and pulp head to foreign markets from Alberta, all carried by CN trains. And of course, grain. CN and grain are indivisible. The prairies are grain, and CN moves millions of tons a year, has for more than a century. You know, about 3,300 CN railroaders make their homes in Alberta. The railway operates 2,500 miles of Alberta routes. It spent nearly $1 billion locally in Alberta last year and paid $65 million in cash taxes. This all adds up to prosperity for Albertans. CN is deeply proud of its place in Alberta's history and economy. Albertans can count on CN, and it wishes everyone a most excellent stampede. You mentioned Moe and Higgs, but I mean, they're boneheads. People tell me, there's been a lot of fun made of Danielle Smith on the Curse of Politics over the years.
Yes.
But to be honest, people tell me that Danielle Smith is a formidable person, that she's smart, that she's informed, and really able to argue her position well. And I've probably underestimated her. What do you think?
You're right. You're right. I think from, as a strategist, as someone who, thinks about this stuff all the time, I think one of the things we have to do is stick to first principles, which is never underestimate your opponent, never put them into a box of a caricature, right? It's exciting, it's fun, and makes you feel good. It's a warm blanket that on cold nights makes you feel like you're on the winning side of history, but history doesn't matter unless you actually fully shape it, and you don't shape it unless you fully recognize what you're up against, which is Danielle Smith, for all her flaws, and there are many, including the fact that I think she's so open to certain ideas and perhaps doesn't necessarily have a moral sort of like center in some ways in terms of what she believes, which I think makes her very dangerous in terms of what she's willing to accept with the small group that surrounds her. And I think of that as policies and frankly, even as outcomes of those policies. She's a talented communicator. She's incredibly curious. And I think that thing is that particular point. You've heard me mention curiosity a few times, and I've talked about it around how we and the NDP and progressives in general need to be curious about why people vote a certain way, think a certain way, not judge them. Danielle Smith is one of the most curious people I've ever met. And I think that is her superpower in politics. You folks have said it as her superpower is her communication skills, her ability to moderate in certain things, to gaslight, whatever, right? And I'm having that as charged as a negative connotation, of course. But I think her biggest skill is her curiosity. Now, I think it's also her biggest downfall because I think she's so curious to the point she accepts certain things because she doesn't maybe know what she believes. And here we are. We end up with the most regressive anti-trans legislation in the country, or we end up with Bill 20, or we end up with the continuous fights we do with the federal government. And some of them, most of which are nonsensical at this point. But she's an incredibly curious person who will give anyone their time to be heard. And I think as a political skill, to feel heard, like, as a voter, David, you know this, right? To have a leader who makes you feel heard is an incredible gift. There's very few leaders that actually, when they listen to you, make you feel heard. Right. And I think and I say feel, because I think the feelings here are important, right? And I think the NDP and any progressive party going forward, we can't just fight on the facts, right? We need to fight on the feeling that the other side is emoting. And one of the feelings that she emotes, and she has over the years, I've been on her talk show many times, and as a progressive person, arguing politics of the day, et cetera, she'd make you feel heard. And that's a political skill that she has, and she can do that at scale. Right. And I think she does it. She overcorrects on that in certain ways, as I mentioned, but she makes people feel heard. And it comes out of that raw curiosity of, OK, tell me why. Right. Oh, that's interesting. Right. And you can actually leave a 50-second conversation with Danielle Smith, as she's going to have across Stampede right now, which gets started tonight and moves on to the next 10 days. There's going to be thousands of people who have that conversation who will leave her feeling heard. Now, do I feel like we've got the right guy on the other side to do the same? Absolutely. To do more and have the policies that can back it? Absolutely. But I'm not underestimating Danielle Smith as an opponent. I'm not underestimating Danielle Smith as someone who can stitch together a coalition beyond the far right. She's shown how she's done it, and she continues to do it. She's going to be a tough challenge, but I feel like we've got to respect what they bring to the table as much as we try to undermine the things that we disagree with them, which there are plenty.
So it looks like by the time your election rolls around, we're going to have a Poilievre government in Canada. What impact do you expect that to have on Alberta politics?
It is interesting. I think any government change is going to be, important to understand how to navigate. Where we kind of find ourselves. We look at 25 on the calendar for federal. We look at 27 on the calendar for provincial here in Alberta. So a couple years of navigating as opposition. The question
you need Trudeau to lose, right? Like, you don't want to be carrying Trudeau around on your back in the next provincial campaign.
The question is really, does Trudeau even run, right? As you guys have talked about in your pod and we've talked about, is Trudeau even part of the mix? I think going forward, though, I think it's the same sort of approach that many progressives in the prairie provinces have taken, successful ones, when there's been conservative rule, which is you work with who you have, right? You speak out with what you disagree with, and frankly, you especially if they're forming government, you continue to make deals, right? It's not just like you make deals with the progressive sort of thing, or if you're a conservative, you continue to say, you know what, I agree with this part of it. I agree what Smits has done here with this conservative deal, but here's what I would have done instead. You say how you could have made the deal better, and he's done that consistently. That is his style of leadership, right? Yes, is there a pugilism to it? Absolutely. Absolutely, there's a pugilism to it, but there's also a deal-making aspect to it. There's also a let's get the best for Alberta aspect to it. Even if it's conservative brethren, patting each other on the back, does that actually help Alberta in certain ways? How do we get the most for Alberta? I think that's going to be part of that going forward. And then there's going to be outright major policy points, right? What happens to the carbon tax, right? Where does Naheed Nenshi and the Alberta NDP propose? We go with our sort of environmental policy here if Pierre Poilievre undercuts and as he said, axes the tax, David. So, what happens when that happens? What happens here in Alberta?
Could you see a situation where Alberta under Nenshi has a more aggressive climate policy than the feds do under Poilievre?
I think there's many provinces that will, including ones that might be, conservative in nature, quote unquote, and Doug Ford and others that might have a more sort of robust climate policy. But I think what we're doing here is responding to climate in a way that also respects the innovation of the sector, that understands its importance, that understands its ability to continue producing, et cetera. So I think there's a partnership to be had if that should be the case. And in fact, I think there's even more case to kind of showcase what Naheed Nenshi's leadership looks like when it's a federal government that doesn't necessarily see him eye to eye in many files, but maybe does on quite a few.
Do you see climate, or does he see climate policy as linked to Alberta's capacity to sell the last barrel of oil?
I think it's one of those things that is going to have to be discussed. I think on the stump, you hear him say that we should have the right to produce that last barrel of oil here, but we shouldn't make transition a dirty word. We have the ability to actually be a leader here, not a bystander. That means developing jobs, policy, innovation in Alberta that is climate oriented. I think that's the scope of the policy right now. But absolutely, from the perspective of ensuring that we have the right to have that last barrel of oil produced here in Alberta and sold to the world, we are going to have to make the progress that's needed on climate, but more so on transition. So ensuring that the folks that work in our sector have successful, viable, possible futures here in Alberta, that there's not a brain drain of the younger generation, studying a certain subject and then bolting or never even considering an Alberta university. It's a more comprehensive question that's going to be having to be asked, and I think that's certainly part of it.
Right. All right, we mentioned Trudeau. Let's just, for the last few minutes, swing around to the federal level, because we mentioned Trudeau.
Yeah.
Yep. What do you think of his situation? Is it irrevocable?
What do you think of his situation? I want to turn this on you for a second. Like, I'm really curious. I've been so deep in this campaign for the last little bit, but I'm curious to get your take, as you guys have been observing this for the last number of weeks and frankly months at this point. I'll give you my top line. He's been out there publicly stating what the budget needed to do for them. It hasn't done it. And we're now on a T-minus however many months of this clock ticking before it becomes possibly not viable to replace him unless you expand the mandate on the back end and take an extra year. I'm kind of thinking about that as is that where we're at right now? Do we need to have someone replaced, and then so that they don't have to be forced to run on a budget, expand the mandate on the back end, take a hit for that, and try your luck in 26? That's kind of my top line thought.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's very likely at all to be able to salvage this. I mean, it's the 10-year rule of Canadian politics, compounded by a really bad economy for people, and compounded by a government that has alienated some of its constituents over time, and a prime minister that has clearly sort of worn out his welcome with most people. I don't see a path back for him absent some sort of catastrophic move on the part of Poilievre. But it's also not likely the case that somebody who replaces him will win either. There isn't a lot of track record of success at the federal level.
Yeah. I think it's tough for the Liberals right now. Kind of speaking more so in pundit mode rather than what we were chatting about earlier. I think it's extremely tough right now because they don't have a sense of who will swing the pendulum back, right? And you're used to this, right? Like the march to the left has been so aggressive and then formalized that can anyone ever, at least in the recent months and even years, David, step in there and say, this is not Trudeau's leftward march. That this is not Trudeau's big, and even if you get a Carney with the fiscal bona fides and the globalism and all the great stuff that he brings to the table, that many Liberals or more center right, Bay Street style Liberals would kind of like. How can you actually get over the public perception of it, right? Can Carney right away just step in there and be like, no, we're actually swinging the pendulum, and can he do that in a matter of mere weeks or months? That to me becomes a question because, as you know, this natural governing party, this oscillation will continue to happen. I don't kind of think the Liberal Party is in like long or midterm crisis. However, I think whoever takes over, even if they bring a different brand, a different flavor of liberalism, you know this with Martin and Chrétien, as of course you do. Can they do it in the time period that he's currently providing, which is so slim and getting slimmer by the hour?
Right. No, that's right. It would need to be this summer, Zain, so that so that the replacement would have a budget or something
to go off of to actually say this is what I believe, sort of thing. But even
some
that
tangible expression.
Even as we've realized, though, with a party that is struggling to even put out its own advertising right now, right, that probably is hampered for money. Right, that is hampered to put out the. Can they actually? Because we know this, selling on paid media, the same guy doing similar stuff is going to be cheaper than selling a new person doing new stuff when people are not paying attention. And so, just thinking about this from the paid media lens, replacing the leader. Well, it might seem right, and it might seem what they need to do, and they might need to go back to the other side of then the pendulum shift. Holy fuck, is it going to be expensive? It is going to be so expensive in order to even have a shot at viability because they're going to have to sell a new person with new ideas on a new budget in a compressed time period and have a lot of people pay attention. And we can't, and the campaign has to know that they can't rely on earned media and grassroots organizing to do just that. It is going to be so expensive with a new person in place. And I hope the Liberals have factored that into their consideration. Not to say it's not a good reason to do it, but I hope they factored into their consideration.
Right. Do you think Poilievre has some unexploited vulnerabilities?
Yes. I mean, when he was getting elected, we chatted about a collective sort of pundit class, perhaps you and I included, David. We were chatting about, remember this? This is a battle for the soul of conservatism. Do you remember that line being repeated?
I do.
Over and over again. And of course, like anything, like a strong mandate kind of puts that to bed, at least within the party, from a party membership perspective. Does that put that to bed from a voter perspective, right? Like right now, he's looking like the front runner because he's viable. He's done a good ad turn last summer, which he's still feeling the halo effects from, which I'm kind of blown away by. And frankly, because I think it's the Liberals haven't gone in aggressively in some real concerted, here's our 3 points we want you to remember over the course of the next year way. I'm surprised they haven't. I assume it's purely fiscal and financial on their part. But I do think there are nagging vulnerabilities that he'd have around his track record in government. And I'm not getting specific because I don't know the specific, but I'm kind of lay out the tracks for you, right? His track record in government, I think that's going to be interesting. The fact that he's always been in a political role since a very young age. There's a lot of people that don't have an appetite for that, but does it matter? I don't know. I think his biggest vulnerability is going to be the future forward stuff, right? And really the Liberals would need to perhaps have two things happen to them. Number one, they need to have cost of living and economy kind of dial itself down a bit on the issue list. And we've seen that happen. Can it happen in a year or so? Maybe. And number two, I hate to kind of put these omens out there, Herle. So like, I'm going to knock on as much wood as I can. Do the Liberals actually need Trump to show what like disastrous conservatism looks like, what reactive populism looks like? Not to make those comparisons. I don't think they need to go with the shorthand being like, look at what this guy's doing. No, but they need to have a nuanced sort of sense of like, here's what happens, right? Here's what can happen. And I think they need those two things in order to kind of make that argument or whatever arguments available against Pierre Poilievre to be stronger. Is the social conservative angle, as we'd probably bring up, and as the Liberals I'm sure would bring up near the end, on the table? Yes, if done right.
He's trying to insulate himself against that.
Yeah, he is. He's done a pretty good job. In fact, he's done a good enough job that he's kind of brought in more socially conservative people unapologetically into that fold, right? Like my good friend, Jamil Jivani, from Durham, replacing Aaron O'Toole, incredibly bright. Probably an unapologetic social conservative, if you ask him, right, and be like, and he would say, "That's who I am, and that's who I'm going to proudly be." No longer stuck to the side, the edges of the party. No longer seen as someone who would be a liability, but in fact, seen as someone who's probably going to be occupying a front bench seat should Pierre form government. So that brazenness, I don't. If they really lean into it, I think there's opportunity there. But we've seen that sort of question, and I think the U.S. will be a good example around how far they go and how far the Liberals can make the argument around women's rights and social conservatism and things that actually matter to people. But honestly, I have to kind of say this in a way that is respectful. I don't know if any of that matters unless cost of living and economy get off the top issue list.
Right. What water has the Liberal class been drinking? Because if you follow Liberals on social media, they would consider Poilievre to be the scariest prospect that's come down the pipe in Canada for Prime Minister. But the polling evidence I've seen says the Canadians don't share that view really at all. In fact, more Canadians think another 4 years of Trudeau is a scary prospect than think Poilievre government is a scary prospect. So what are we seeing in him that other people aren't seeing, or what are we mistaking?
I don't know if we're mistaking anything. I just think that it's a combination of some of the simple stuff. The Liberals have not been out there defining him. And when they've kind of turned their eye to him, they've been going for broke every single time. And that seems like an overcorrection, right? Kind of goes back to the first part of the conversation. I don't want to be in a position where 3 years from now, we are doing, third and 40 from our own side of the field trying to throw Hail Marys. And this kind of seems like third and 40, using a terrible analogy, because I don't know how many penalties you would have had to have on that play, Herle, to make it third and 40. Or
it would be Edmonton under Chris Jones that would do that.
There you go. I knew you were going to bring in a CFL reference. I'm glad you did. Right, but you're on your own half. Just everything is just like you're just trying to Hail Mary it. And I get that vibe from this, right? I get that vibe because they haven't put paid to the campaign. They haven't chipped away. Right? There's no base for me to go to mentally as a voter to be like, oh yeah, Pierre Poilievre, X, Y, and Z. That's what I need to remember. Instead, what I hear is like a tweet or a single ad being like, Pierre Poilievre, worst fucking guy that's ever existed. And being like, whoa, okay, that just goes over my head. And I think that's just politics, right? I haven't been given a cogent, easy to understand, simple talk on my level case that has seeped into me over the course of the last 2 years so that I can, every time I hear his name, I can go that as where I start my journey off of.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think because that hasn't happened, I think everything sounds like, trying to go for that long bomb every single time. It sounds, and then the political class kind of sees that as desperate because it kind of is. They see it as overcorrections because it kind of is. And then you see it as unbelievable. Even though it may not be, it kind of is because you haven't given them the building blocks. So,
and since it's not backed by money, it has no chance of having any impact.
There you go. Right. And so we're kind of in this position where Liberals have really little strategic operating room available on opponent definition unless they start right away. And frankly, I'd say this, unless they scale back their ambition a bit, right? They probably want to put out an ad campaign right now that just burns him to the ground. Well, folks, it's been 16 months, right, where he's been surging, and if not ahead in a number of those months. If you go for broke, you're actually just going to go over the head of people.
No.
Right now, it's a
crack the door open, create a doubt.
Create a doubt, wiggle in something, and then start the seed of the conversation, right? These benign chips, these cuts that you need. Frankly, they're probably thinking, good advice, I guess, but we don't have the time. And this is where political parties end up when they have only money left over for the end. We were just chatting about this on the first half of the conversation. You stock all your money. You had no ability to define your opponent, no ability to have any building blocks. You're starting from zero. You haven't built the bridge before you need it with any of these folks, right? Going back to that analogy, you haven't built the bridge with any of your prospective supporters. Your supporters don't know what to say about them because they're like, wait, are we off the social conservative side of things? Because I thought that was it. Because you're not saying it, because you're trying to think of one silver bullet attack that takes them down, and there isn't one. There isn't one, right?
Telford made a really important strategic decision in 2015 that I wish she had made this time, which is they didn't have the money for a full campaign in 2015, and they decided to start the campaign spending as if they did. And if the money doesn't show up, then we lose, and if the money shows up, then we're in good shape. And I really think that they should have taken that approach this time as well.
Yeah, I agree. And they should have done it last summer. I think you guys were saying that. We were saying that, especially in this new world order, this new political world order where a lot of stuff is no longer as effective and paid is increasing in its outright efficacy and effectiveness. You have to.
Yeah, excellent. Zain, thanks for this chat. It was fantastic.
Really, as always, thanks for having me on.
Congratulations on the success of both your leadership campaign and your pod, and you managed to do them both together. I don't know if you were declaring conflicts of interest every week or whatever, but you congratulations on both outcomes.
Oh, well, thank you. And listen, and I'd have to say that one of the reasons I could do the pod while doing the campaign is the amazing people around this campaign, and it just was not me. So thanks for this conversation, but I do want to give a shout out to the folks I mentioned and the incredible volunteers and the management team and all the folks that just kind of showed up. It's really exciting what we're able to build going forward.
Yeah, I would have gotten those people, but I don't know them. So I knew you and I
got
you. So.
There you go. Well, I'll give a shout out to them. Shima, Devery, Jesse, all the folks that kind of ran the ship. So many good people, and I've mentioned a few of them already. So
great.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Thank you, our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN, and all of you Herle Burly-ites who watch or listen to this show. Great to have you, and see you next week with more stuff. Until then, take care of yourselves.